So you want to dive deeper into the world of horror books, but you don't know where to start. Hey guys, my name is Jena, and I absolutely love to read horror books. So today I picked 6 books that each represent my favorite subgenres in horror to share with you. All of these recommendations are perfect for newbies to get the idea of what each of these subgenres are about and to help you explore the world of horror. Starting off with my absolute favorite subgenre of horror, we have paranormal horror. To represent this, I think the perfect pick for a newbie would be The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This book is a psychological horror novel centered around Hill House, a malevolent mansion investigated by Dr. John Montague and a group of psychologically gifted individuals. The story, told through the perspective of Eleanor Vance, explores the blurred lines between reality and the supernatural as the group faces increasingly unsettling events within the haunted house. So I love this one because it is not too scary. You're not going to get too much gore, too much horror. It's just the perfect balance between actually spooky and kind of going over the lines. A big part of this novel is the unreliable narrator, Eleanor. Throughout the novel, you're not quite sure if what is happening is reality or if she is actually mentally ill. That's kind of a through line throughout the entire book. This is a classic book written in the 1950s. It has become a staple of the horror genre today, so this is the perfect place to start diving into the horror genre. You may have seen The Haunting of Hill House by Mike Flanagan, the Netflix original series. The book is the inspiration for the series, but the book is very, very different from the show, so I think it's definitely worth the read, even if you've seen the show. I thought it was awesome to be able to compare the two, and it made the Netflix series a lot better for me, getting able to see where Mike Flanagan got his inspiration from, and what he transformed it into, I thought was really incredible, and made the book and the series a lot better for me. Next genre I want to talk about is called adventure horror. It's a genre that I've been seeing a lot more of lately. Basically, in this one, your main characters are either exploring a remote island, Antarctica, or a mysterious sunken ship, and horrific things begin to happen to them. For this read, I chose From Below by Darcy Coates. Decades after the disappearance of the SS Arcadia, a mysterious emergency message, and the absence of any trace of the ship or its crew, the wreck is discovered 300 miles off its intended course. Cove and her dive team gain permission to explore the silent graveyard beneath the ocean's surface with the goal of examining the rusting hull and uncovering the ship's vanishing act. However, the Arcadia holds a malevolent secret, and as the team delves into its depths, they realize something dark and predatory is watching from below. With dwindling oxygen and the ship closing in around them, Cove and her team must confront an unspeakable horror determined to claim them. I love this book. I don't even know where I first discovered it from, but I'm so glad that I did. I read it probably more than a year ago, maybe just less than, but this is a book that I think about all the time, which is why I think it's the perfect one for newbies. It is a longer book. It's in the 350 to 400 page realm, so it is kind of a commitment to start, but I felt that it was super fast paced and extremely interesting. I have never read a book like this before. It takes place pretty much completely underwater, which is definitely interesting. I've seen a movie similar to that, but nothing like this. When I was in middle school, my Roman Empire was the Titanic, so I think that might be why I enjoyed this read so much. But again, it's so unique that I think it's definitely worth the read for everyone, especially those people just getting into the genre to see kind of what adventure horror is all about. The next genre I want to talk about are psychological thrillers. In this genre, you're not necessarily facing a ghost, a demon, another kind of creature. Instead, what you're messing with usually are the horrors of other people. So for this one, I chose A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This book is a psychological horror that revolves around the Barrett family. It's narrated by Mary Barrett, who recalls disturbing events surrounding her older sister Marjorie, who is believed to be possessed by a malevolent force. Struggling with financial difficulties, the Barretts agree to allow a reality television crew to document Marjorie's apparent possession and the subsequent exorcism attempts. I chose this one to represent psychological thriller because this book does a really good job of pulling in some classic horror elements from the paranormal subgenre while also remaining true to the psychological thriller. I didn't want to choose something that kind of delved too deep into the murder mystery because we're going to get there later. And I think this book does a really great job of that. This book is not too intense for newbies, really for anyone, but I would go ahead and look up trigger warnings before reading this if you're sensitive to some of the traditional content that might be in horror books, because this one does have a pretty large one towards the end. So if you think that applies to you, please go ahead and look that up before reading it. But it is going to be adapted into a movie soon, so I always prefer to read the books before I watch the movie. And Paul Tremblay is kind of becoming a classic horror author in the genre, so this is definitely a great read to kind of figure out what he's all about while also diving deeper into the horror genre itself. The fourth subgenre I want to talk about is the murder mystery, probably the most classic subgenre of everything in horror, where I could argue the genre started and emerged from. So for this one, I chose Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. So Where the Crawdads Sing follows the isolated upbringing of Kaya Clark, the Marsh Girl, and a murder investigation in the small town in North Carolina. This one is a classic example, I think, of literary fiction. It is a coming-of-age story combined with a murder mystery. I think that that's an extremely unique way to tell a story. This is another book that I've never really read anything quite like it, that just captures the literary elements of fiction so well while also trying to weave in some pretty horrific things that happened both to her in her upbringing story and also in the murder investigation in her adulthood. There's some hints of romance, so I know lots of people are reading romances these days, so there is that in this. I hate romance, but I actually really enjoyed the romance story that was in this, so I think it is appealing to everyone, even if romance isn't your thing. Because this book isn't too graphic, even though it is about a murder, I think it's the perfect place for horror newbies to start and get into the murder mystery genre. This is a really well-loved book. Everyone who I know who's read it, except for one person, liked it a lot. Reese Witherspoon chose it as her book club story, and that's kind of where it got so well known from and was really loved then. It was also recently adapted into a movie, so if you love the movie, I'd highly recommend the book. They're pretty similar, but there are some key differences. The book, you spend a lot more time with Kaya and her upbringing and the murder investigation, so I prefer the book over the movie, and the movie wasn't as well loved as the book, to say the least. So definitely recommend Where the Crawdads Sing as your murder mystery sampler. Sci-fi horror is the next genre that I chose, and it is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You combine sci-fi and horror into one to get sci-fi horror. To represent this, I chose Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. Days away from unemployment, Claire's beacon repair crew intercepts a distress signal, leading them to investigate. The signal leads them to the Aurora, a luxury space liner that vanished 2 decades ago. Hoping for a lucrative salvage claim, Claire and her team discover unsettling signs on board, whispers in the dark, mysterious movements, and blood-scrawled words. As Claire fights to maintain her sanity, she must unravel the truth behind the Aurora's disappearance before she and her crew succumb to a ghastly fate. So yes, this is another ghost ship book. I am starting to discover that I really am interested in ghost ships, but it is what it is. What I really enjoyed about this book is that it does not get too bogged down by science fiction or fantasy world building. It's pretty straightforward. You don't need to be a scientist to understand what's going on. It's basically our world, but with space travel. Another thing that I loved about this book that I think really made it stand out for me is the scary visuals in it. When I first started reading horror books, I didn't really understand how an author could make a scary experience to a reader. I loved horror movies, I understood what made that scary, and I just didn't think that that would translate over to a book. But it's books like Dead Silence that really show how horror authors are able to create a terrifying experience, especially through their visuals. And S.A. Barnes does this incredibly, incredibly well. I read this a year and a half ago, and I still remember the visuals that were in this book. They're just the visuals, the scary, horrifying elements that just stick with you even long after you finished this. It's an incredibly unpredictable book. It's fast-paced. It's a shorter read. It's under 300 pages, if I remember correctly. So I think this is a great one to add to your list if you're looking to discover the world of sci-fi horror. And the last genre I chose was horror comedy. Again, exactly what it sounds like. Horror and comedy combined into one. And to represent this, I chose Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. Now, this book is not funny in the way it's written, it's funny in its concept. So this book is set in a fictionalized version of IKEA, and the entire thing is written and illustrated as if it were an instruction manual. But beyond that, there's nothing really funny about this, which is why I think it does stand pretty firmly in the horror world over the horror comedy world. Nothing too horrific, nothing too gory, just a very interesting read, and frankly, a really absurd concept, but Grady Hendrix does it really well. He is a really well-known author in the genre, so I think this is a great book of his to kind of read and understand what he kind of writes like. He's written a couple more that are, again, kind of absurd in concept, but not necessarily funny in writing, that fall into this horror comedy genre. And I think this, especially with its length, its fast-paced narrative, the pictures, make it a great one to start off if you're interested in learning more about horror comedy or Grady Hendrix in general. So those are my horror recommendations for horror genre newbies. Again, I think all of these books are great books to read if you are trying to delve deeper into the world of horror. In the comments below, let me know what you're adding to your TBR list and what your favorite subgenre of horror is. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.